All right, good afternoon, everyone. Hope everyone's staying warm. It's a bit cold in San Carlos here. Happy fall. I'm Can, and I'm here with Linkso, and today's talk is going to be about biodiversity in California native plants. And we have Dr. Lynn Trulio from San Jose State University. She's been a professor for a very long time, and she has a very impressive bio. I want Lynn to just sort of introduce herself, and some of the exciting things that she's done is burrowing out research, and she's been conducting work with US EPA in the past, and she has a PhD in ecology, and she's just amazing. So welcome, Lynn. We're so happy to have you here, and we're excited for your talk today.
Well, thank you so much, Ken, and I really appreciate you inviting me to give this talk. As Ken mentioned, I'm Lynn Trulio, and I'm a professor of environmental studies. My primary areas of research are in wildlife ecology, and as Ken mentioned, I've been studying the burrowing owl for a number of decades in California and in the West. And but in addition to that, I've done a few other things, including I was the lead scientist for the South Bay Salt Pond Restoration Project, and so I have a really long background in restoration, and and you know I am a wildlife ecologist, but the thing is that you can't study and protect wildlife unless you know their habitats. And of course, the habitats are the plants in particular that species depend on. And so I have come to some understanding of plants and especially native species in California through the wildlife that I've studied. And I'm so thrilled to talk with you today about California biodiversity, especially with respect to plants. And I did want to say that this year I took the Master Gardener training, and so I am a 2024 graduate of the Master Gardener program. And in that program, I have been working with some colleagues to talk about gardening, especially with natives to promote wildlife and pollinators. And so I come at this topic from a number of different angles, and it's a pleasure for me to talk with you about it today. But by the way, I do love questions. If you please put your questions in the chat when they occur to you, okay? I will try to answer a few as I go along. Can't say I'll get to all of them, but if I don't, or some that I don't get to, Ken will help at the end to bring those forward so that I can answer all of your questions. So thank you very much for joining me today. All right, so we're talking about California biodiversity. And we know that we love California. There's so many amazing species here. And so we are, a place where there is, as I say, a treasure trove of plant, animal, and invertebrate species. And in fact, California is what's called a biodiversity hotspot. And we'll talk quite a bit about that. Here are a couple of some of California's treasures, including vernal pools, of course, redwood forest, and this is the endangered bay checker spot butterfly. Okay, so I said California is a biodiversity hotspot. Well, what makes a biodiversity hotspot? Well, scientists have been looking at habitats around the world that support a great diversity, a great abundance of species. And so when we talk about biodiversity, we're talking not just about the species diversity, the abundance of species, but also about the genetic diversity within species in their natural habitats. Scientists have identified a number of hotspots around the world. I believe the number is still at 36 hotspots. And these are places where there are at least 1,500 endemic species. And these areas, though, have lost at least 70% of their vegetation. So it's a combination of a hotspot because there are a lot of species, but these species are at risk. And as you can see, these red hotspots shown on the map are around the world, and California is one of these hotspots. And you might notice that a number of hotspots are in tropical environments, but there are a lot of them that are in Mediterranean climates, which is what characterizes much of California's climate. Oh, so how do we qualify as a California hotspot? So when I'm talking about California, I'm going to talk primarily about the California floristic province. And you can see that outlined here. It's in the sort of pinky orange area on the map, which includes most of California. But there are a few areas that, kind of large areas too, that are not in the California floristic province. They're in different floristic provinces. So the Sonoran floristic province, you can see the Sonora Desert at the bottom is also part of California. Great Basin floristic province is on the east side of California, and in the very north is the Vancouveran floristic province. But the California floristic province is something we focus on because it has more biodiversity and endemic species than any other floristic province that we're talking about. Certainly any other one in California. And it is an amazing area where we have a great number of endemics. And I just want to see if anybody wants to unmute. Can people unmute, Ken, or is that no? Is that a no?
No, they can just use the chat.
Oh, they can
type
just
in.
use the chat. Okay. So you probably know what an endemic species is. But I will tell you that is a species that is found uniquely in a certain area and nowhere else. So when we say California endemic, we mean a species that is found only in California, no other state. Okay. So remember that the definition was you had to have at least 1,500 endemic species to qualify as the first level of qualifying for a hotspot. We have over 2,000 endemic plant species alone. So approximately 40% of the plant species found in California are endemic. They're found here and nowhere else, which is pretty amazing in the floristic province, I will say. And I did want to mention that our California floristic province goes up into Oregon just a little bit. And that'll be sort of important a little later. But you can see that we have a great number of endemic plant species. We also have a whole lot of endemic insect species. Over 30% of something like 28,000 insect species are found only here in California. So that's pretty darn amazing. We have a few native endemic bird species and a few endemic mammal species, but the ability of those species to move around more means that there's fewer endemics. But you can think of an endemic mammal, which might be the salt marsh harvest mouse, which is found around the San Francisco Bay, or an endemic bird species like the Ridgway's rail. So we have a few of those, but it's really the plants and the insects. And so that's the first criterion to be a hotspot. The other one is you have to have hotspots have to have lost at least 70% of their native vegetation. Sadly, we qualify in that category too. We have lost approximately 75% of the native vegetation that occurred in California historically, basically before European Americans got here. So what are some factors in this diversity? Why? And I'll let you put some things in the chat. So now we'll do some chat here. What are some factors that result in, do you think, in all of this diversity of plants and insects? What are some qualities of California, do you think, that result in in this diversity? Go ahead and put something in the chat if you have an idea.
I have Mediterranean climate via chat.
Okay, so I can't see the chat, is that it?
Sorry, some are direct message to me.
Oh, okay.
And some are in the public chat. So you can see the ones that are visible to
Yeah. Oh, let me address a question here. Is that loss of species the number of plant species or area or volume? It's 75% loss of native vegetation, so that's by cover. Okay, sort of by area. So when we talk about we've lost, say, 80 to 90% of wetlands, that means the wetland area that occurred. Good question. Some factors, climate. Yes, California, right? Our Mediterranean climate has a Mediterranean climate, which of course, it's dry in the summer, spring and summer, wet in the fall and winter, the winter rain. So yes, the general climate of a Mediterranean, there's something about the Mediterranean climate that does seem to promote endemic species. But one of the main factors about climate, and we talk a lot about this with the master gardeners and anybody who gardens, are the microclimates in California. There are so many microclimates just in the Bay Area, right? So these microclimates result in certain, conditions that species have to adapt to. And because there's so many, we have a lot of adaptation to these many different microclimates. Any other thoughts on why there might be so many species here?
There's also fire that came in.
Fire. Okay, yes, we do have a fire regime in California. Fire is part of the natural disturbance regime of California in many parts of it, maybe all parts of it. And species have adapted to that, and that's very true. Something else, though, I'll mention is the varied topography. The varied topography of California. So when you're talking about a lot of species, you're talking about having a lot of different types of habitats for them to live in, and diverse soils. Yes, thank you, from Lisa Putman. Diverse soils, absolutely. Diverse microclimates and diverse topography. These are all factors that have contributed to the diversity that we see in California, and why when you go to the Channel Islands, you're going to see different species. They might look pretty close to some species that are on the mainland, but they're a little bit different, right? Okay, great. So in the California floristic province, we have five principal biomes. Okay. And you can see the map on the left actually is a map of historic ecosystems and biomes in California. And then the map on the right is sort of what we have today, which has been shaped by shaped into different human altered habitats in a lot of places, right? So let's see, I'm having trouble with my bar. Okay, there we go. Okay, so a biome is a regional ecosystem, all right? And it's composed of distinct species shaped by climate, geology, and topography. And remember, we just mentioned all those factors in creating and supporting species diversity. Our five principal biomes are grasslands, deserts. Deserts are primarily outside the California floristic province, but I'll include those because they're such a big part of California. Conifers, chaparral, and oak woodland. In the California floristic province, we primarily have the grasslands, conifers, chaparral, and oak woodland biomes. And here are some nice views of some of our conifer forests. So in the Sierra, some of which is in the Great Basin. Yeah, I guess it's mostly in the California floristic province. Some of it might be a little bit in Great Basin. And by the way, these floristic provinces have very soft boundaries. It's not like it's a hard and fast thing. Okay. So, our beautiful coniferous forests up in the Sierra, and mountainous areas, Santa Cruz Mountains, and then of course redwood forests, which are super unique ecosystem, or I would call them an ecosystem. They're a biome. They're their own thing, and they create their own habitat, and they are found in California and up into southern Oregon a little bit. And then here are some views of oak woodlands. And of course, oak woodlands are a dominant, very dominant biome in the California floristic province. They had covered, much of the area of the non-wet area. It's characterized by, in the past, by native bunch grasses, many of which have been replaced by perennial grasses, but also lots of different types of oaks. And we have many oaks that are completely endemic to California, found only here. And then, of course, there are grasslands. Grasslands, especially near and dear to my heart. This is the primary habitat of burrowing owls. And if you want me to talk about burrowing owls, you can ask me a question. I can talk ad infinitum about burrowing owls. But they are found in grasslands, along with their with the species whose burrows they use, especially prairie dogs. Especially ground squirrels in California, and other species such as badgers. By the way, grasslands are not doing well throughout California or the West because we're not protecting them well enough. And that is why the burrowing owl, for example, along with some other grassland species, but the burrowing owl is now a species that's being considered for endangered or threatened status. That just happened this fall. Another very large biome in California is the chaparral habitat, which is just amazing habitat, characterized by small to large shrubs like manzanita, so many different kinds of manzanita, ceanothus, and so many different types of species that are adapted to this very hot and dry type of condition that you find in chaparral. We have some beautiful examples of chaparral. You can always find them nearby. And then deserts, again, primarily outside the California floristic province, but a huge part of California and the overall biodiversity of our state. Then I wanted to mention vernal pools and other wetlands. Historically, the entire Central Valley was a wetland, and that has primarily been replaced by agricultural lands. And so California has destroyed approximately, 90% of its original wetlands. So wetlands are very precious in California and endangered, and have many rare and endangered species. So I want to particularly point out vernal pools. And if you've ever seen a vernal pool in action, it's just such an amazing thing. These are pools that have a hard pan base to them, and therefore pool up water in the wintertime and result in a very much of a wetland. There's little no oxygen in that soil. It's waterlogged. And the species that inhabit vernal pools, we have adapted specifically to these pools. And there are many endangered vernal pool plants and some animals like a vernal pool fairy shrimp and so forth, because we have really eliminated a lot of vernal pools. They occur typically in grassland habitats, which again aren't doing well. We are not protecting them, and they're being developed at a very rapid rate. We also have a lot of tidal salt marshes, and here's a really nice view of a tidal salt marsh that occur some along, mostly in the bay and in other quiet waters and embayments where there is tidal fluctuation twice a day. So the San Francisco Bay, for instance, we had eliminated probably 85% of these wetlands that occurred historically, and we're doing a lot of work now to try to restore quite a few. And then here is a riparian corridor on the right, a stream habitat with the streamside riparian vegetation, critical for supporting a wide range of species that are both here year-round resident and migratory species. Okay, I wanted to point out just a few of our San Francisco Bay Area endemics, species that are found only here in the Bay Area. So for instance, here is a Dudleya on the left, which occurs in serpentine grasslands. And then Lenosperma bakeri, which is a vernal pool species. It's called Sonoma sunshine. It's actually called Sonoma sunshine. It's found in vernal pools up in Sonoma County. It's an endangered species. That's what this E means. Because vernal pools, we have eliminated a lot of vernal pools. And so there's a cute little guy, that guy. And then here we have the San Mateo woolly sunflower, which is found in oak woodlands and serpentines, and found only, look at this, San Mateo, right? I mean, many of these species are very localized, which is really amazing. I mean, the endemics are amazing. And we have here just a couple more. Okay, poppies, right? We have poppies, state flower, but there are a lot of different species of poppies. And here's one, the San Benito poppy. And this one occurs in oak woodlands, grassland, chaparral, mostly down there in San Benito and Santa Clara County. Chaparral checker bloom in the middle, and then an endangered species, the Sebastopol meadow foam, which is another vernal pool species. So you find many of these vernal pool species are of limited distribution and have become endangered. Okay, so giving you a little taste of the understanding of California's biodiversity, especially with respect to endemics, which are found only here. And, you know, I just mentioned 40% of the plant species in California are endemics, a lot of insect species. So why do we have so many endemics? What gives rise to these species? Okay, what gives rise to species? This is an enduring question in ecology. And so since I'm an ecologist, yay, time for some ecological theory, which I hope you don't find too painful. I wanted to talk a little bit about how species arise and what that might mean for California. So why so many endemics? Where do endemic species come from? So we have to go back to the beginning with Darwin and his finches. And so, you know, before Darwin, before Charles Darwin, his grandfather, I think, was Erasmus Darwin, who, you know, there's some idea about where species came from. How do they occur? You know, how do they arise in nature? And and so there was an idea that they evolved somehow, but no one really understood how that happened. It took Charles Darwin to figure it out. And of course, his epiphany occurred on the Galapagos Islands. It was forming as he was going around the world on the Beagle. But I think his epiphany really occurred in the Galapagos, where, well, first he had been to, you know, to South America, right, to Ecuador, and it seemed, you know, a whole bunch of finches over there, and he you know, had observed the finches on the mainland, but then when he came to the finches on the Galapagos Islands, they looked really similar, but yet there was differences, definite differences. In particular, he was looking at the shape of the bills, okay, the beaks on these finches. And you can see on the right, these 4 different finches, they're all, well, 3 of them are in the same genus. they're different species and their bills look very different. And as he observed them, he could see that these birds were actually making their livings a different way. So some of the birds with the giant bills were chomping great big nuts. Others were picking seeds out of, you know, picking seeds out of flowers. And so, you know, he over time began to form an idea of how species evolved and what he found, what his epiphany was, what he is, what his theory has become the basis of ecology and biology, is that species have evolved through adaptation. Okay, they have, so, and basically it's through reproduction in which there is variation, and the individuals that are best adapted to the environment are the ones that survive and pass their genes along. Okay, so that revolutionized the way we thought about nature. And so we understand that, you know, as species encounter new environments, then they have offspring. These offspring have a variety of different traits, and the offspring with the traits that fit them best to their new environment are the ones who are going to survive and pass along their genes. Okay, so this theory became more nuanced and we got a deeper understanding of evolution by natural selection. And by the way, that's Charles Darwin's theory: evolution through natural selection, through the natural selection of individuals who are best suited to the existing environmental conditions. Okay, in the 60s, MacArthur and Wilson, and MacArthur, University of Chicago, and his then grad student, E.O. Wilson, who died a few years ago. He's best known ecologist and wrote many books on biodiversity. They developed the theory of island biogeography, and the theory of island biogeography has, in fact, also revolutionized the way we think about species and also how to preserve species. So here is their concept. Like, okay, if you look at islands and you look at the mainland, okay, and you go to islands, you would find, you know, not only species that look different from what's on the mainland, like Darwin found, but you find different numbers of species. Okay, so on islands, you know, you might tend to find fewer species than on the mainland, or you might find different types of species that are on the mainland. Why is that? So in their theory was this, and this theory, by the way, is just, it's so central to how we think about preserving species today. Okay, you have the mainland. That's where all the species are and really where they come from. Okay, so you have California, and then you have Hawaii. Hawaii are the islands, right? And an island is an area of habitat that is surrounded by inhospitable habitat. So an island can be a number of different things, and we'll talk about different types of islands in a second. We tend to think of islands as land in an ocean, right? Okay, so what MacArthur and Wilson postulated, and has many people have found over the decades, is that you will have more species on an island if that island is closer to the mainland. Okay, so we have 3 species on the mainland, and then you have 3 species on this really large island that's close to the mainland. So you'll have more species when it's closer to the mainland, and you'll have more species the larger the island. So here we have in this, can you actually see my cursor?
Yeah.
You can. Okay. Okay, so here we have two islands. So we have mainland over here on the left, two islands, a big one, and it's got 3 species on it. Here we have a little one that's just as close to the mainland, but it doesn't have as many species. Okay, well, that's because it's small. You might say this is all really intuitive, but it wasn't at the time. It wasn't at the time, and it's intuitive now, I think, because the theory of island biogeography, we sort of have it as part of our intellectual thinking about habitats now. The reason for this, and you can see the further islands. If you have a bigger island that's further away, it's going to have more species than a far island that's small. Okay. These species numbers on these islands are a result of a balance of immigration and extinction. Okay, so immigration, the ability to get somewhere. The further away an island is, the harder it is to get to it, right? So you would expect fewer species on islands that are further from the mainland. All right. And so that's why even the small island has as close to the mainland has as many species as the one that's far away but large. Okay, immigration. The other is extinction. The smaller your habitat patch, the fewer species can be supported. Okay, so if you have a small patch, small island, it's going to have fewer species than this big island. The worst condition is a small island that's far from the mainland. It's not going to have as many species as the others. And again, this is a key principle in conservation biology. It applies to all kinds of taxa. It's been tested with all kinds of taxa over the years. Well, I'm going to stop and see. Okay, I don't see anything in the chat. I don't know if anybody has a burning question right at this moment. Okay. Okay, so originally they were looking at, islands out in the ocean, but, islands can be a lot of things. Islands are habitats surrounded by inhospitable conditions. All right, so here we have your typical island, right, at the top. Now, here in the middle, we have alpine zones. So you see these mountaintops here? Those are islands, or islands surrounded by a sea of inhospitable habitat, because these mountaintops have conditions that are completely different from when you go down slope, right? So animals like the pika, if you're familiar with pika, it's an animal that it needs mountaintops. It can't survive in the forest. It needs cold, mountainy areas. Okay, these mountaintops are islands. Ponds are islands. Ponds are islands that are surrounded by inhospitable habitat, which is terrestrial land. All right. And then here we have isolated forests. And now we can think about today's conditions when, for instance, we have deforestation occurring and patches of original habitat remaining. Those patches of original habitat are now islands. They used to be a mainland, but now they're islands. And then we might have grasslands surrounded, native grasslands surrounded by a sea of agriculture. Okay. These grassland islands are, just patches, they're islands. And of course, we can have habitat islands in urban settings. And of course, again, now we have islands. Now, islands have conditions that separate populations from each other and allow new species to evolve. All right. So so islands have conditions that separate populations from each other and allow new species to evolve. All right. So did endemic species arise in California? So is California island-like? What do you think? Is California island-like? Yes, you might say it is. And why might you say it is? What separates it from other habitats? Yeah, the mountain ranges, right. The Sierra is a is a huge barrier, okay? So islands are separated from each other by deserts, by mountain ranges, yes. And the ocean, yes. So we have the ocean on one side, we have this huge Sierra Nevada thing on the other side. So California does, in fact, have some qualities of being an island. Um, it is separated from other habitats by barriers. And California is pretty large. So you might say, hey, California is a large island. And what we learned about large islands is that if they're separated from the mainland, they might have fewer species, but they're pretty close to the mainland and it's really big. So maybe they'll have a lot of species and maybe some species will evolve, okay? That's speciation. That's what happened in the Galapagos. The finches from Ecuador flew to Galapagos. They had offspring and they started to evolve and adapt to their conditions. And ultimately, they became separate species. And so, okay, California's island-like. And so we have seen some speciation that has contributed to our biodiversity here, especially like in lupins and mimulus and in salvias, sages. So I just want to say that the research that I'm citing here um, is now informed by genetics and genomics, which have completely changed our understanding of the natural world. And it's just been so amazing. So we can now look at the genomics of different species and see how closely they're related to other species. And so back in, when was that? 65? I don't know. Stebbins and Major postulated why there was so much diversity in California. And they did mention speciation as being part of it. And indeed, speciation has occurred in a number of species. But it turns out that a whole lot of other species found only in California are relics of an earlier time. And these, you can think about them, for instance, as for instance, redwoods and sequoia. In the far distant past, when redwoods and sequoia evolved, they were found way west of California. They were very widely distributed. But as climates changed, mountains arose. So we're talking geological time. Species like redwoods and the sequoia were their ranges shrank and now are found only in California. So these were once widely distributed species that now exist nowhere else except California. So California has been a place where relics of an earlier time have survived. These relics have survived, and we get some speciation also because of the size and the habitat variation in California. The size and the habitat variation in California has reduced extinction. So we mentioned that immigration and extinction are the two processes that result in, or part of the processes that result in species existing. And so California, because of its size and because of its habitat variation, has reduced extinction. So what we have found, and there's this great paper by Lancaster and Kay, if you want to read about it, it's a pretty, I think it's a pretty manageable paper on the origin and diversification of California flora. What we have found is that California is a center of biodiversity because it's preserving ancient and relic species, and also through speciation. And these species are able to survive because of the large size of California and the diversity of the different habitats. Because California is so big and has so much unique biodiversity, it is an exporter of species to other regions. Regions such as Hawaii, which may not be that surprising, although Hawaii the Hawaiian island change, are those islands are further from the mainland than any other island chain. They're really far away. But we have exported species there and to the Andes, okay? So ultimately, California is a species refuge and a source of biodiversity to other regions. So here we can understand where our species came from and why, as Californians, we're so proud of our biodiversity. It is so important to not only California but to other regions. And so we understand now a lot about the origins of our unique species. Okay, so how do we keep them here? Biodiversity hotspot criteria 2. Yep, California's lost 75% of its habitat and is losing species as a result. So we're losing our biodiversity as a result. How do we maintain this incredible biodiversity that we are so blessed with? Well, right now, California has over 300 species that are listed as endangered or threatened, a lot more on the brink. And, these are the reasons why. Urbanization, urban sprawl, agriculture, really bad agriculture like feedlots, and pollution. All right. And so, you can say, okay, well, in places where you're having these impacts like urbanization, agriculture, that kind of thing, species are losing their habitats, of course, which results in fewer species. All right. But even in places where you might go, hey, this looks pretty pristine. Here we are out in the, Sonoran floristic province, probably near Joshua Tree. I was in the Mojave Desert. Okay. So studies have shown that in the Mojave Desert, we go, hey, this looks pretty pristine and natural. There's actually great declines in species there. So, for instance, the study by Ikenan and Bessinger showed that 61 study sites in the Mojave Desert showed fewer birds compared to they were redoing a study that had been done decades before. And they found declines in 39 of 135 species. And you go like, well, what's that about? I don't see any urbanization here or ag. But the cause, they believe, is drying and warming due to climate change. We know that climate change is the most existential threat facing our planet today. It's facing all these species and it's facing us. And we can stick our head in the sand and say it's not happening, but that won't stop it from happening. Excuse me a second. Paper I read that came out this year found that endemic species are especially at risk from climate change impacts. And I think you can see why that is. Endemics tend to be adapted to maybe narrower habitat conditions. Of course, their range is relatively small compared to a very widely distributed species. And so endemics are especially at risk from climate change. So scientists have rightly noted and tried to get everybody's attention about the fact that we are in a sixth global mass extinction crisis. Mass extinction crises have happened before in the life of the planet. Absolutely. Currently, approximately 8 million species are on the brink of extinction. And current rates of extinction are many thousands of times higher than the natural extinction rate. And it's really affecting, all kinds of species, right? There have been other such events, as I mentioned before, mass extinctions. There were 5 mass extinctions in the past 500 million years. they were caused by natural forces such as volcanic eruptions, a lot of volcanic eruptions, loss of ocean oxygen, or, of course, a meteorite, which is 65 million years ago. But this crisis is caused by us. We know that. This time the meteorite is us. And we're just having huge, huge, huge impacts on our planet. I probably don't need to try to explain the problem to you guys, but I do like this rivet poppers analogy, which was developed by Paul Ehrlich, the great ecologist who is at Stanford. Here's how it goes. You're in an airplane and getting ready to take off. You look out, on the wing, and there's a person, a thing, whatever, out there on the wing, and it's popping rivets. This person's popping rivets out of the airplane. Okay. And you're like, whoa, what? They're taking the airplane apart. They're popping out rivets. What? So you call over the the attendant and say, hey, look, there's someone out there popping rivets off of our airplane. We're not going to take off, are we? And the attendant goes, yeah, oh yeah, sure. We're going to take off. And you're like, well, what? Don't we need those rivets? And they say, no, we have a lot of rivets on the airplane. We don't need all those rivets. We'll be fine. And you might say, yeah, I guess if we lost a couple of rivets, we might be fine. But there's going to be a point where there are enough rivets gone that when that airplane tries to take off, it is going to fail, right? And this is the way it is with losing species. You might say, well, what do I care if we lose a, butterfly, this plant here, that insect there, that mammal there? Who cares? It doesn't really mean anything to me. Well, it does, because ultimately we depend on the fabric of life, on the species diversity on this planet to maintain our lives, our livelihoods, our economies, our very survival. And there will come a point where we have lost so many species that we won't be able to sustain our planetary systems. And without our planetary ecosystems, we can't survive. Primary problems, of course, our global ecological footprint is absolutely monstrous, especially US, but there's China's doing their part in Europe, and this ecological footprint is a combination of the number of people that are on the planet and our use of resources, in other words, our consumption. If everyone lived the way Americans live, our lifestyle, we would need 5 Earths to support all of those people. Right now, we are outstripping the biocapacity of the Earth. And what that means is that we are destroying habitats and losing species and destroying the atmosphere. Okay, and all of those things are things, biocapacity is what we depend on. Biggest threats, habitat loss. We talked about that. We've altered between 50 and 80% of the Earth's land surface. Here's some other big issues. Poaching and hunting, extermination, just don't want a species around. Here's a big one, non-native invasive species. Non-native invasive species, like pampas grass. They imperil a huge percentage of species around the world. Some of the big ones we have here are feral pigs. Got to get rid of those guys. European grasses, not so great. Non-native Spartina in the wetlands, and cats. Okay, I've got 2 cats sitting next to me here. I love my cats, but they can't be roaming. They can't be roaming the ecosystem, and they are responsible for extinctions all around the world. And of course, the monster threat is global climate change. We're already seeing the extinction of species due to global climate change, and it's just going to accelerate unless we do something. Okay, climate change scenarios. We've been modeling this for years. We know that our climate is going to change, and that, in California, We're expecting a lot more fire, and a lot more, loss of especially forest habitats. All right, yes, a lot more fire. All righty. All right, but all is not lost. It really isn't. Please take heart. There are things we can do, and I think over time we're going to do them. I just hope that we are. But here are some things we need to do. We need to reduce the population growth rate of humans. We are a big animal and we take a lot of resources, and there's just not enough capacity to support this many people. Even at a minimal, and so many people don't live very affluent. I hate to use that word. They don't live lives where they're just scraping by. So many people, right? And our world can't even support that. So we need to reduce our population, and empowering and educating women worldwide is one of the fastest way to reduce the population growth rate. It's documented. Consumption. We need to reduce the amount of stuff. Reduce, reuse, keep as long as possible. In the US, we waste approximately 40% of almost everything we use. Energy, food, water, you name it. So we need to really reduce this waste and think about and reduce our consumption. Okay, here are some other things we can do. Protect plants and seed banks. Here's a giant seed bank, the largest seed bank for native California plants, actually, in California is the California Botanical Garden down in, I want to say LA. I'm not quite sure. It's down south. And they are preserving as many species as possible in their seed bank. I think we really need to do that so that hopefully in the future, when more habitat becomes available, we will be able to bring those species back out and put them on the landscape. Protect and manage natural areas in perpetuity. Governor Newsom has made a commitment to conserve 30% of California's 100 million acres by 2030. I think we absolutely need to do that. And that's a great goal. We can all support protecting and managing natural areas by supporting our local land trusts and open space organizations, and making sure whenever there's a bond measure to increase funding for these organizations, that we vote for that, and also that whenever we can, we support these land trusts and open space organizations directly. Another thing that we need to do, and we are doing, and I find this very hopeful, is restoring degraded habitat. I mentioned that I was the lead scientist for the South Bay Salt Pond Restoration Project for a number of years. It's the largest wetland restoration project on the West Coast and the second largest in the US. And this project is restoring approximately 15,000 acres of former salt ponds, which had been marsh and were drowned, and now we're returning them back to tidal salt marsh and also to managed ponds for species that need ponds. And California is doing a lot of habitat restoration, a lot, and it is a fantastic thing. And so we also need to support these efforts with our dollars. And recently, California voted for a restoration authority in the Bay Area that funds restorations. I think it's primarily in the Bay Area, and that's been huge. It's been just gigantic. Eliminate non-native invasive species. Okay, we can do that in our own yards, and there are lots of other projects out there, such as getting rid of invasive Spartina, which is trying to take over our tidal salt marshes. There are a lot of efforts to reduce invasive species, and many organizations working on this. Organizations such as San Francisco Bay Bird Observatory, Grassroots Ecology. There are just many organizations. These are just a couple, in the Bay Area. So you're saying, well, what can I do? And so here are some things we all can do. And these things all make a huge difference. Reducing water use and reusing water. So ideas on how to do that, Valley Water has lots of them, and you probably know lots of them, low flow in your house. I mean, there are so many ways to reduce the amount of water that we're using. We'll come to another big one in just a second. Reduce consumption of stuff. Reuse what you have. Eliminate plastic. I have a war on plastic. My husband and I have a war on plastic in our house. There's still a lot of it even when you're trying to get rid of it, but you've got to eliminate it. And I will say, eating less meat. Eat less meat. It has a big impact on water, air, species, habitat. So the cattle industry has had huge negative impacts, especially the cattle industry has had huge negative impacts on the environment. Reduce energy use, use green power. There are lots of ways that we can do this. And, think about all of these things is they save money. Every one of these things saves a lot of money. So, hey, it's a great way to economize. All right. And saving water, along the lines of saving water, eliminate grass and plant native plant species. Yes, we can do this. There are lots of great ideas. The Master Gardeners does a lot with this. The California Native Plant Society, of course, they're all about this. And so there's lots of great ideas from those guys. There, you can see great examples on the Going Native Gardens tour. And also, I think very important is telling your city council to protect species and plant natives to prepare for climate change. We need to tell our local governments to get on board. I've seen many, many cities with sustainability plans, and it's great that they have sustainability plans, but they almost never include species. They almost never include protecting native species, protecting native habitats, and we need our cities and counties to do that. And of course, I will say again, planting natives will help support plant biodiversity and the innumerable species that depend on native plants. So I want to thank you very much for your attention and your love of California's native species. And if you have any questions, I would love to answer them. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I haven't gotten any new questions, but if folks would like to send in their questions, go ahead and do so via the chat, and I can ask here, but let me see. Okay, so yeah, so this class is being recorded and it'll be available under the community resources page. So if you missed a lot of the beginning of the talk, you're welcome to view the class. And question came in, what is the issue with cats? That was one of the questions.
What is the issue with cats? Okay, well, thank you very much for asking. And I'm sorry if you could hear one of mine in the background. He's okay, cats are such great animals and such great pets, but the thing is that they actually, from the standpoint of evolution, they're not very far from their original cat species that gave rise to them, or subspecies, which is a cat in the Middle East. They're they're kind of primitive guys. And what they do is they hunt all day and all night. They can't help themselves. It doesn't matter how much they're fed. It doesn't matter how sweet they are at home. They are going to go out and kill things. And as a result, there are many efforts around the world to try to eliminate cats from islands, trying to get rid of cats off of the, Florida Keys, for example. Um, and so, they just can't help themselves. So if you do have cats, they need to stay indoors, or in a catio, or very, very closely monitored so they don't go anywhere when they're outside. And I will say also, there are people who feed cats, like feral cats and cat colonies. That is just making the problem worse. It's not a good life for the cats. We don't want to have feral cats, and we want them to be out of the environment. I hope that answers your question.
A follow-up on that topic, do those multicolored clown collars that you can buy for cats help with the songbird preservation?
Okay, well, I just saw those recently. I don't know. I think if you put one of those cone of shame things on your cat, that might work. They're pretty, I don't know. They're pretty good killers. So I don't know. I don't know about the clown collar. I haven't seen any evidence one way or the other. I know bells don't work. Okay, forget that. Forget the bells. Don't work. Yeah.
Okay, so we did miss a question earlier, and I think this was referring to couple slides back.
Mhm.
Let me see here. What was the base time for the study, and when were the 135 species observed?
Right. All right. Let me just take a quick look over here to this. Okay. Do I have these guys here? Um, I don't have it handy. I'm sorry. I thought I had their study in here. Okay, no, I don't. I don't have it handy. So I can, if you want to email me, I'm happy to answer that question for you.
Okay, this is more so of a comment, but you can expand on this. But are you familiar with the California Newt Habitat Restoration Project at Henmilla in Los Altos Hills?
Not familiar with that project, but I'm not surprised to hear about it. It's a great place for newts, and we have a lot of amphibians that need help. Amphibians worldwide need help, so I'm glad to hear that there is a habitat restoration work going on for them. I think that's really great, and they need a range of habitats, including wet and dry. So we need to make sure we provide the conditions they need for their whole life cycle. So it's good to hear.
Okay, I don't think we have any more questions, but I do want to share oh, never mind, there's another one here. How are you handling discussions around diminishing water and water rights and native species preservation?
Um, okay, discussions around diminishing water and water rights. Okay. Well, we have completely altered the California landscape and water regime in order to suit our purposes. As a result, we have a bunch of endangered salmon, rivers that aren't functioning right. And so I really think that we need to rethink the whole water regime. We need to, now let me just say that we as individuals can help to save water, right? With our practices. However, 80% of the water used in the state is used by agriculture. And we need to change the way agriculture is done here. We shouldn't be growing almonds with all that water and then shipping them overseas. So I think we need to have a real, realistic discussion about how ag is using water, because it's not going to get better, and how to make our state more resilient. We can still grow the food we need without overusing our water resources and providing water for species. I mean, really, people who fish for salmon for a living said they're all, their livelihoods are getting wiped out, right? So how do we should be thinking about their livelihoods too. I don't know if that answers your question or not, but it's a big question, and a lot of it has to do with ag.
Thank you for that. So here's another question. Are the freeway wildlife over underpasses really effective?
Oh, yeah. We are just about to implement or are implementing some really great freeway underpasses and overpasses in our area. I would say they are very much effective. Now, there's been a lot of stuff that was done that was not effective. Okay, like putting a little culvert, it's like, yeah, some animals will use that, but that's not that great. The recent um, projects are a result of really great research in which wildlife ecologists studied where animals were trying to cross highways, so like Highway 17, where animals were trying to cross, where most of the animals were being killed, why they were there, and really targeting the locations where animals are trying to, animals are moving. Okay, so we're targeting these areas that really are known as places that animals are using for moving between, across these huge, horrible barriers like highways. And we need a lot more of them, and we really need to design our highways to include these types of passages for animals. I mean, the number of animals killed on the road is horrific, and it's one of the reasons that populations aren't doing well. So thank you for that question.
All righty. Can you discuss management of natives in a globalized ecosystem / trade? The role of aphids and blights, aphids, I think, and blights and invasive insects.
Yeah. So we have a number of agencies, APHIS, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, others who are really trying to prevent non-native species, harmful species from coming into the U.S. It's not that they care. I mean, they do care about native species, but what they really care about is the economy. And so you get these really nasty insects that come in, or blights that do a number on agriculture, different agricultural products. So there are a number of agencies really trying to prevent the transport of species into the U.S. and around the U.S. Now, as you mentioned, our globalized economy, our globalized world has resulted in species being moved all around the planet. And so it's pretty hard to stop it, but there are efforts to try and keep it under control. I don't expect the movement of species around the world to stop anytime soon. And so you're going to continue to see new species come in. And the ones that this paper I mentioned about endemics being at risk mentioned that widely distributed and introduced species that do well are less at risk of climate change. Oh boy. So you really don't want to let them in. But we make a lot of efforts, and there's a lot of money spent to try and keep stuff from like the Great Lakes from getting here and stuff from here going there, that kind of thing. So yeah. Jeff Jenks asks about the invasive tree of heaven. I'm not plugged into that particular project, but there is a project. It's a citizen science project with the Master Gardeners, I believe, on identifying. I think it's tree of heaven, identifying tree of heaven, like trying to get rid of it. I'll tell you what, these invasive plants, I was talking with a colleague recently, it's like, you got to nip it in the bud when they turn up. You cannot mess around. And otherwise you get tree of heaven, it's everywhere. So You get pampas grass, you get whatever, star thistle, you name it.
Okay, I think that's all the questions. We've addressed
Yeah.
them all.
And if the person who asked me about the time base wants to hang on, I can find that out in just a second if you just want to hang on. Otherwise, thank you so
Sure.
much, everybody. I really, really appreciate you being here today.
Yeah, thank you. This is such a great talk. And on this note of natives, I do want to promote Dr. Doug Ptolemy's talk conference coming up this weekend in Oakland and in Santa Clara University. So there's still tickets on sale and available for a Santa Clara University one. It's coming up this Sunday. The Saturday one's all sold out. So if you're interested, there is a link that is shared. It's bringbackthenatives.net, and California Native Plant Society is putting this on along with Golden Gate Bird Alliance. So please do check that out. I will be there this Sunday, so maybe I'll get to see some of you. It's a great talk. So please check that out if you can. And for those of you who are asking, will the recorded link be available? Yes, it will be under Linksos Community Resources page. So please look for that. I will post it tomorrow. So it should be available by no later than Friday. So that's about it.
Okay, and I just do want to say, because I'm a researcher and I can't help myself, I did find an answer to that question.
Okay.
The original time base, the original surveys were done by Grinnell, Joseph Grinnell, at the beginning in the early 20th century. And then these researchers followed Grinnell's path again, because he made meticulous, detailed descriptions of where he went. And so that was from, really sort of over the course of 100 years. So there you go.
Great. Thank you for finding that out.
Yes.
That's great. So saves an email back and forth.
There we go. Yes. Yes.
But thank you so much, Lynn. This is such a great talk and so informative. Again, we're very grateful that you spent time talking about a topic that we care so much about, and you as well. And, thanks for everybody for attending. And thanks again. This class will be on our website, so check it out. Take care, everyone. Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you, Ken.